Okay, we're back here in the words of Rabbi Tatz, and we still did not get to the final, I guess, the blow that we'll say, or the final punch, which is if man could be moral on his own, and that's like a basic function that's inherent in every single person. And you really could get there without the Torah. That's what Rabbi Tatz was saying before. So then, it's a question of why do we need all of the laws that we have inside the Torah, if morality itself will dictate more or less what's the proper way for a person to live, which is a good question. Because if we don't have a good answer, then I probably won't see you on Wednesday, because you don't have to come back anymore. Now, he says like this. The title of this little chapter of this little piece, sense of obligation is the basis of moral principles. And he says, what underlying sensitivity founds the detailed, specific issues of conscience? Now, again, when we say morality, that means everybody has a conscience. And my conscience dictates what is right and what is wrong, meaning the guilty conscience that the Jew walks around with in this world is a very good thing, because that's a measure of the strength of the moral compass that is inside of the person. When I feel guilty about doing the wrong thing, that means that my conscience, which really is my soul, is exclaiming inside of me, why did you do that wrong thing? You know that that's not good for you. So guilt is a positive expression of the real inner yearnings of the neshama of the soul, where the soul is saying to the person, you really shouldn't be doing this right now. That's beneath your moral dignity to do such a thing. So what is this sensitivity that is the underlying aspect of the soul? And he says that the most basic of all moral sensitivities, and he comes from a very interesting angle over here, we have to think about it, the basic of all moral sensitivities is a sense of obligation. And he's going to explain what he means by that. Before one can feel a particular moral imperative, one must be sensitive to the basic force of obligation as such. You could only feel that you need to be moral in these circumstances if you feel a certain obligation for that particular thing, as we will see. Before any particular obligation can be registered in the mind, there must be an awareness of moral boundary in general. But before you can even get to knowing what your obligation is in this situation, in this place, this relationship, whatever it might be, so you got to also know that there is an awareness of the moral boundary in general. So we're going to see these things have to work together. There's an awareness of moral boundaries, but there's also an understanding that I have an obligation to act in a certain way. Now, he says, we know that we are not the sum total of reality, but a contingent part of it, which means we're a part of the universe. That leads to the awareness of obligation, deeply rooted in the sense of being a dependent part of a larger context. There's a whole universe, there's a whole world. I'm only one little speck of dust in that universe. Now, am I responsible for the world the way that it is going to run? Now, the way in which we have all been convinced to make sure that you recycle all of your recyclables is because they're promoting that everybody has an obligation to this universe. And if you don't dispose of your plastic bottles in the right way, and you do not recycle your cardboard in the right way, so then you are responsible for destroying the world. So I have an obligation now. The reason that I am recycling all of my goods in my house, and people have special cans in their house just to recycle, and I have to put everything in the blue bin just to recycle, is because I'm convinced that if I don't recycle my water bottle that I just drank, it could be I'm destroying the ozone layer. Maybe I'm creating havoc in the oceans. Maybe there'll be a dolphin that's going to die because I threw away my can. Maybe it's all because of me. So therefore, I understand the obligation as a result of that. So society has told us that it is immoral not to recycle. And the moral prudence that a person is obligated in is, they must make sure that they recycle their stuff. So now he comes to our world of Avram. And listen to what he says. This was the first thing that Avram realized in his path to discovery of God in the world. What did he realize? That he was part of something much larger than his own being, that had brought him into existence and placed him in his situation in the world. Avram was looking around and he saw this world is humongous. This world is running in such a magnificent, incredible way. And I'm just one little cog in the whole miraculous creation of this world. And this awareness set him on his journey to discover the agent of origin, which is obviously Hashem. Man's very being ought to suggest that something is expected of him. Taking one's existence for granted represents a basic moral failure, perhaps the most basic. So if there's a big, gigantic world, and there's a lot of things that are in this world, and there's other people that are around, so it's clear to me that I have some kind of an obligation to behave in a certain way to take care of the world in the right way. When we were in school, and this teacher would come with their rules and regulations for the classroom, it's because they're expecting the class to run in a certain way. You are one of the students in a class of 20, 30 children, and in order for the class to be able to run properly, you have to take responsibility for yourself and your actions and your behavior, what comes out of your mouth, the way that you roll your eyes, the way that you whisper, you pass notes, so on and so forth, to make sure that this class is running properly and smoothly without any pushback. So Avraham Avinu looks at a world and he sees that he's only one little piece of this entire universe that's running so great. It must be, said Avraham Avinu, there's something that I'm obligated to do in this world as well. I have to facilitate a running of the world, a keeping of the world going, preserving of the world. What do I have to do? So says Rabbi Tatz that a person who takes their own existence for granted and doesn't think that they have any obligation in the world towards others and towards the world itself, that, he says, is a moral failure. And then he says, a person who does not feel any obligation to anything beyond himself is hopelessly lost morally. He has not begun to move along the path of moral development. Meaning, a selfish individual who thinks only about themselves, they will most likely come to a very immoral kind of a life. Because if everything revolves around me, and I'm not beholden to anybody else, then my actions really have no bearing on your life. And they have no bearing on somebody else's life. And they have no bearing on the nature of the world or society or the culture. Because I'm really only focused on myself. So therefore, whatever I want, whatever I desire, whatever comes up in my mind, that's what I'm going to pursue. Maybe what I'm going to pursue and try to take advantage of in this world is really a negative force that's going to hurt other people, but I don't care about anybody else because I'm focused in on myself. Says Rabbi Tatz that a person who doesn't feel an obligation to anything beyond himself is hopelessly lost morally. No moral obligation in particular begins without a sense of obligation in general. A sense of gratitude leading to obligation to a benefactor, awareness of a right of ownership that leads to respect for property and so forth, will not speak to one who has no sense of obligation at all. Meaning, if someone does something good for me, I now have an obligation towards that person. That's why many people don't like to take favors from other people, because I don't want to be obligated towards you. But if I know that I live in a world where there are obligations, And the nature of relations are such that when somebody does you a tova, they do you a benefit, they do you a favor, you now have an obligation to have gratitude towards them. Or if somebody, however it's going to work over here, awareness of a right of ownership that leads to respect for property is over, right? I'm not going to walk into somebody's property and walk all over their grass and destroy their front lawn and then walk away. I realize that this person is the owner of the house. Their ownership of the house obligates me now, who is not the owner, to treat their property in the right way. But if a person doesn't have a sense that there's obligations in this world, he doesn't realize that there's a power outside of himself, or there's people that have their own rights in this world, so then such a person is no more developed than an infant who sees the world only as a mechanism for feeding his needs. Does a child think about anybody else? No. He thinks when he wakes up at 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm starving, I want a nurse right now. My mother needs to sleep. I don't care about my mother needs to sleep right now. I need to eat. So he begins crying off his head. And a kid is getting older, and they want, and they're always grabbing. Are they thinking about anybody else? Maybe it's not a good time for my father. Maybe he's busy right now. Maybe my brother's playing with the toy, and so he should be playing with the toy. But I also want the toy. So the kid goes over and he knocks his brother down and he takes the toy for himself. And the kid's lying on the floor in a pool of blood, crying his head off, and the other kid is happy that he got the toy. Children don't understand at a young age that others are entitled to their things, and therefore you have a moral obligation to behave in a certain way. We hope that as parents we can train and we can teach our children from the youngest age as possible that there are moral obligations and there is a mind that you're supposed to use in the right way to be able to discern things. But in general, a kid, that's what he's saying, a person who doesn't have this sense of there are powers outside of myself that create an obligatory way that I have to act towards it, he's no better than an infant who's just busy thinking all day long about what he's going to get. Beyond childhood, there should be an awakening of something more, and maybe that awakening we can refer to as maturity. So you can't remain an infant all of your life. You can't remain a child all of your life. It's part of the downfall of marriages in the world today, is the selfishness and the lack of selflessness. People only think about what I'm going to get, and they don't go into marriage realizing, no, marriage is a moral responsibility and obligation I have right now to be aware of this person's world and what they need. And when a person goes into marriage only thinking about themselves, so then they don't understand that there's obligations that they have to fulfill for the needs and the wants and the desires and the necessities of the other person. So this is what he's saying. You could remain an infant all of your life, who's grown up, can walk on your own 2 feet and can have work and money and family and everything, or you can actually be an advanced human being. And that is someone who has a sense of, I'm smaller than everything else in the world, and I have to understand what is my obligations to people, and ultimately, as we're going to see, what's my obligation to Hashem. Now, once we could begin to understand that there's a God that created this universe, and He's running the world, and He gave us the Torah, then we can understand the Torah is not a list of rules. The Torah is a list of the obligations that we have in this world to allow us to serve Hashem in the proper way. Now, only someone that is striving for that moral perfection and understand that there's a God that is giving us the rule book that we are supposed to abide by is going to appreciate and understand what all the obligations, the mitzvahs, we'll call them commandments, and they really are commandments that are obligating us to serve, to live our lives in a way that's beyond what we per se want, but it's what God, who's the master of the universe, who created us and knows what's best for us, what He has given us.
But that doesn't answer the way you're describing is you're being taught moral values. And you start out by saying you really don't need the Torah because you already have moral values. Now, without the Torah, you won't be able to be taught what the moral values are. So if there's no Torah, how are you going to, those moral values just don't come to people without having some teaching about it.
Well, okay, so it's two things. So
You
it's
started out the whole topic.
right. So
you don't need the Torah because you already have it in you.
meaning there are basic human moral truths that everybody has inside of them.
But it's all learned, though. It's not.
No, so that's what he's saying. They've done sociological studies where they found people from all different spectrums of the universe, from different nations, from different, what do you call it, financial realms, wherever you go, from America to Zimbabwe and everywhere around, there are basic truths that everybody knows, is that you don't cross that line. Now, the Torah comes along and tells us that our moral obligations is even on a higher level than the basic level that we thought.
100%. But your example is there are different people all over. They learn how to live within their own society, and that's how they live together. But if you took, let's say, a bunch of babies and raised them just by themselves, I don't think they will have these moral values, because everything is around them. I want, and that's all they want.
Well, again,
they get older and become,
Again, a person that never developed this concept of obligation, you're right. Yeah. They'll remain a selfish person.
Right, but I'm saying.
So part of being a member of society is that you leave yourself. Yeah, but you're also, there's giving you an awareness of the sense of obligation that you have towards the other people that are around you. Now the Torah comes and it knocks it out of the park and raises the sense of consciousness to a much higher level.
And I agree. But what gets me a little confused is that you start out by saying you don't need the Torah to get all those values.
And that's what he's saying. The truth of the matter is, the basic core values of morality, every person has inherently inside them without that. Now, we might struggle because maybe we grew up too selfish or too spoiled. Or maybe we've got the way that our brain works in certain ways, we don't see the simple truth so clearly. Or maybe we got influences in our life that are pushing out the morality and making us more immoral in the way that maybe that's all true. So then you have to have the Torah to be, it's the guidebook that's always going to be there in every generation to show you clearly. But the point that he's making in the beginning is that you actually could understand it on your own if in fact you'll be in touch with your rawest, purest self.
Your environment, though, is going to dictate how you grow up.
Yes.
Growing up in Tarzana versus growing up in Compton, the child is going to have a whole different perspective of life.
That's correct.
What's right and wrong.
That's correct.
Right?
That's correct.
So even if they're born with good in them,
right,
it outweighs what's around them.
Correct.
The drugs and
correct.
And crime. And
right. That.
Talking about that, I think they still know that even if you go to Compton, they still know the difference between right and wrong. They believe what's more acceptable in my society than outside that society. I mean, I'm willing to do the drugs, I'm willing to do more crime, I'm willing to take that risk even though they know it's wrong. Knowing it's not right, and they still do it, gives them a moral value.
I mean, that's up for discussion, because when the guy just murdered somebody,
I think he knows it's wrong.
But he's sitting on the witness chair or whatever, he's on the defense chair, and they're questioning him, and one of the things that his lawyer is going to do is tell us about your life, tell us how you were raised, Jerome, and so he's going to begin explaining. When I was 3 years old, I saw a Crip walk into my house and shoot my father at close range and blow his head off. And my mother had, she had, not mistresses, whatever, she had different guys that were coming to their house, all the time. And my older brother was in the Crips, and he was always on the streets doing drugs and shooting people with his thing. And I was busy at 5 years old playing Fortnite all night long. And by the time that I was, 13 years old, I was I was inducted into the gang with everybody else, and this is how I live my life.
Right.
So then what? So then they're going to say. So then he's going to turn to the judge. So what do you expect from this guy? He was raised in such a way where killing was his norm. That was his moral compass.
They knew it was wrong.
I don't know if they know that. Maybe that's the
They
thing.
would tell them, be careful, you don't want the police to see you.
Yeah, because the police gonna tell you that. Okay, no problem, Sam. I mean, the police think that it's wrong, but in our world, that's the way that it works. So it's up. That's up for discussion.
Okay, I see your point of view.
Yeah.
In the tree of knowledge of good and evil, a child, their mind is not developed. It has to be filled with knowledge. That moral values, that those are something of the mind. The emotion, the obligation would seem to be an emotional thing, insofar as love, shame, you're going to do. You feel an obligation, mother to nurse her baby. Just Abraham, one could discover this on his own, but thinking that the Torah comes to say, for the social fabric of society, these are the moral values, that universal moral values of the 7 laws. And we can all look at those objectively. It's with our minds. And then we feel obligated, because if we don't, then we're going to be shamed, we're going to go to jail, we're going to whatever. Does that make sense?
Kind of. Yes, the Torah, again, once that we have the Torah, it's going to set the bar of morality. And this is from God himself. That means that the God that created the universe and created all of our souls is telling us this is the greatest level of morality and obligation that you could possibly have in this world. And once that it's codified, once that it's there, so then it's immutable and it doesn't change. The soul of man has never changed in thousands of years. It might get more covered up by all of the different schmutz that's in every single generation, but the core of the soul is all the same from the time of creation. That means the soul of Moshe Rabbeinu that needed the Torah and all the Jewish people in the wilderness, our soul is deeply connected to all of that. It's all the same. And therefore our morality and our obligation and our service of God is all dependent upon that as well.
Why did it say obligate Adam and Chava not to eat